Well, welcome to this special session. My name is Derek Alderman. I'm the current past president of the American Association of Geographers. Hopefully by now you know who I am. If not, this has been a huge conspiracy. As past president, I have two great honors. And the first of those is to deliver an address to the membership. I'll put you through that pain just in a few minutes. The second, which I think is actually much more positive, is to select and recognize recipients of the Presidential Achievement Award. The AAG Presidential Achievement Award recognizes individuals who have made distinguished contributions to the discipline of geography. It's one of the highest honors in our association. Our recipients of the 2019 AAG Presidential Award are two scholars who I have long admired and whose careers embodied the values that many of us in geography hold dear. Our recipients represent the very best in publicly engaged scholarship, student-centered teaching and mentorship, and service leadership in the advancement of inclusion and social justice. Please allow me to introduce our honorees who are seated here with me, and they will rise up to receive the Presidential Achievement Award after I describe their contributions. And this is just so that we're all on the same page. This is when you get very excited and make sure that they understand how much you appreciate that they're here. Everyone understand? Very good. So our first honoree is Dr. Ricky Sanders, Professor of Geography and Urban Studies at Temple University. At Temple, she also has served as chair of her department, Director of Women's Studies, and a fellow at the Center for the Humanities. The Presidential Achievement Award recognizes Dr. Sanders' path-breaking role in enhancing diversity, inclusion, in geography and championing the study of race, gender, and social justice within the discipline and beyond. She has become an important voice in addressing marginalized communities and cities. She has published in highly respected outlets such as Women's Studies Quarterly, Professional Geographer, Gender, Place, and Culture, Journal of Geography and Higher Education, Anapode, and Urban Geography. Her long-standing contributions also include award-winning instruction. She is the past recipient of the AAG's Gilbert Grosvenor Award for Outstanding Teaching, and she's also received the Distinguished Teaching Award from the National Council for Geographic Education, along with a host of other college-level teaching recognitions that we can't mention here today. Dr. Sanders has led important initiatives to broaden the participation and belonging of historically underrepresented groups, recently earning an AAG Enhancing Diversity Award. She directed the NSF's funded Finding a Way project, which sought to bring more women into geography. That program received the Eleanor Roosevelt Special Commendation from the American Association of University Women. Dr. Sanders powerfully uses her scholarship and her own biography to address inclusion head-on, to confront white privilege and gender inequality in education, and to create dialogue between racial and feminist theorists and classroom teachers. She puts the ideology on the road and directly onto asphalt. Dr. Sanders is a beloved role model, having transformed and enriched the lives and careers and perspectives of many geographers. Please join me. That's your cue. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sanders and congratulating her. I think that has to be the most pleasurable experience I've had as AAG president. In fact, I think that's the only one. Hey, I just got a few months. I'm going to say what I need to and get on out of here now. So for those who don't know me, it does nothing but get worse from here. So our next honoree is Dr. David Padgett. Dr. Padgett is an associate professor of geography and director of the Geographic Information Sciences Laboratory at Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. And before we get too farther along, I did not select David for this award because he happens to work in the same state as I do. This is always comes up, doesn't it, David? The Presidential Achievement Award recognizes Dr. Padgett's significant contributions in advancing geography, GIS, and STEM education within historically black colleges and universities, an important but traditionally neglected community within our discipline. Dr. Padgett has become an important authority on the opportunities and challenges facing geographers at predominantly minority-serving institutions, as well as those working in small academic programs and blended departments, with many of you out here in the audience work in those same kinds of departments. His wise counsel has been critical on a number of AAG initiatives. Dr. Padgett has amassed an exemplary career in community-engaged scholarship and teaching. He has developed nationally recognized curriculum in environmental justice, green career development, and teaching race and class and earth science. Through Tennessee State's GIS lab, Dr. Padgett has supervised several undergraduate service learning projects in Nashville that address issues such as public transit accessibility, homelessness, urban food equity, and respiratory health disparities. He and his students have developed working relationships with a variety of grassroots groups, nonprofits, and government agencies. He's led a number of national workshops and projects funded by the likes of NASA and the United Negro College Fund to demonstrate and disseminate geospatial technology and analysis to citizen scientists and educators beyond geography. Dr. Padgett sits at the front line of convincing many, many people of the value of geography. David Padgett forcefully illustrates our discipline's capacity to leverage geographic knowledge for public outreach. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Padgett and congratulating him. Now I would like to turn the podium over to our current president of the AAG and a great colleague and friend of mine, Cheryl Lozatter Beach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derek. Dr. Derek Alderman is a cultural and historical geographer interested in race relations, public memory, popular culture, and heritage tourism in the U.S. South. Much of his work focuses on the rights of African Americans to claim the power to commemorate the past and shape cultural landscapes as part of a broader goal of social and spatial justice. His work spans many aspects of the Southern landscape, including civil rights memorials, especially streets named for Dr. King, slavery and plantation heritage tourism sites, NASCAR, Graceland, and Memphis, Mayberry and film tourism, and even the cultural geography of kudzu. In August of 2012, he joined the faculty at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where he is currently professor of geography. Derek earned his PhD at the University of Georgia in 1998, and I had the pleasure of meeting him there when he was a master's student between 1990 and 1993 at the University of Georgia. As a junior faculty member then and as a senior faculty member now, I am so proud of Derek for all that he has accomplished. So I want to take just one moment to ask you to applaud for the first time and not the only time tonight. I know how much he loves to joke, for Derek. Behind his gentle and humble humor is high-impact research, teaching, and public scholarship to bring civil rights to the forefront, which has been a powerful theme and will have a lasting impact on the American Association of Geographers. Derek has published scores of publications. He holds scores of honors. He asked me to keep it short. He served as AAG president in 2017 and 2018, and he is now our AAG past president. So I turn the floor over to Dr. Derek Alderman, who will be speaking on Keeping It Real in a Post-Truth World, Geography as Reparative Storytelling. Derek Alderman.
Cheryl, thanks for that very kind introduction. I'll wait till I get started so she can sit down. I am very honored to have served as president of the AAG, and for those who know me personally, I had a very modest undergraduate geography background. Probably shouldn't be standing up here, but anyway, it was quite a journey, and in fact, I want to dedicate this address to two people. First is my wife and partner, David Alderman, who her love and support and advice has made it possible for me to be here. No, I mean, she really helped me get ready this morning. I'm that incompetent, honestly. And then the second is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Daniel Good, my very first geography professor, teacher, who just basically lit a fire under me in terms of getting excited about geography, about public engagement, and making the case for geography. So you can blame those two people for what may happen here today. Calm down there. I really have three primary goals today. I want to first explain what I mean by keeping it real and how it's related to an initiative that I'm developing and hope to develop further in the future. Second, I'm going to argue for enhancing storytelling as a core professional skill and responsibility within geography. And one of my main arguments is that stories are more than just the dissemination of information or ways of entertaining audiences, although entertaining is not half bad, goes a long ways. Storytelling may sound soft or non-scientific to some people, but I want to offer a much more empowered idea about stories. Stories have the capacity to rework the construction of knowledge. They have the ability or capacity to redraw the lines of social power. And they also have the power to redirect the public discourse and action that we surround issues and problems with. In my address, I want to ask you to think about what work stories can do within and for geography as a tool of education, as a disciplinary promotion, in terms of outreach, in terms of community building, and also in terms of scholar-activism. I take a pretty much a work approach. I do come from working class people, and so I take a very working approach to stories, which may seem a bit new or strange to some of you. And I'm interested in identifying the hard work that's required of consequential storytelling. And storytelling is not just about telling a good tale, but actively leveraging geographic research, teaching, and outreach to inform debate and decisions. It's about empowering also marginalized perspectives and voices. And so I want to highlight some of the strides that many of you in the audience have already made in geography in the area of storytelling, but also point to future opportunities, strategies, and challenges. And specifically, I want to encourage you, and this is sort of the crux of the title of the talk, to consider the reparative capacity of stories, particularly in light of the current social, political, and disciplinary moment that we're in and the challenges and tensions that we face. There's I think, a tendency to think, well, let's keep our heads down, but this is exactly the opposite of what I'm arguing. We absolutely need to be on the front lines of telling our story on our terms that can affect change and help people. Reparative storytelling is an action-oriented and decidedly interventionist approach to communication and geography. It's a commitment not just to communicate well, but to affect change. It is a very exciting time to be a geographer. We're witnessing increasing levels, record levels of membership in the association, in no small part due to Doug Richardson, our executive director. So please make sure you continue to express your appreciation to Doug. We also have seen in some universities growth in geography programs, courses, enrollment, faculty hires. And I've witnessed firsthand in my many travels as president and past president the impact that many of you have on the discipline and its reputation. So allow me, and if you don't mind, join me in thanking you for what you're doing for geography. However, doing all this can be very tiresome and very daunting work, very exhausting, and it does not come without challenges. We in geography have a lot to be proud of, but we also have seen significant threats to our discipline, its core values, and practitioners. Many of our colleagues, some of you sitting in the audience, have experienced severe budget cuts, the elimination of programs and majors, the political rescripting of curriculum, travel and immigration bans, racialized violence and discrimination and harassment, and attacks on academic freedom. We also face the challenges of living and working in what has become and been called the post-truth world. The post-truth world is characterized by, and you can probably give me this list better than I can give it to you, we've all lived it, the suppression and falsification of information for political expediency, attacks on journalists, an open disregard for scientific evidence, a rollback of human and civil rights, a growing distrust of universities, and an elevation of the emotional geographies of fear and hate over the public empathy for and solidarity with others. These post-truth struggles unite all of us, whether we are physical geographers or human geographers or those in the GI science field. As the author Ibram Kendi reminds us, denials of climate change and denials of racism rest on the very same foundation. Both are attacks on observable reality, and they are also attacks on the credibility, findings, and advocacy of scholars. This is an issue that unites us all amongst our diversity. Post-truth often feels like something new and revolutionary, but it's actually been around for a long time. There's a long history of data, narrative, and rhetoric being weaponized and used to control agendas, groups, and places. Regrettably, geography, along with other sciences, have been sometimes complicit in this process. No one knows the politics of information control better than people of color in this country. For generations, they have seen harmful and demeaning stories and facts told about them. These stories have been used to justify violence against their bodies, against their movements, against their communities, and against their aspirations for equality. The post-truth is more than just a struggle over scientific facts. It is more than just a struggle over alternative facts or a struggle over fake news. It is a longer and broader struggle over the ideologies and social truths that come to define the terms of life, that come to define who and what counts in this world, and which communities and environments are allowed to be victimized. Recognizing the highly charged political and disciplinary moment that we are currently in, and really have always been in, I devoted much of my AAG presidency to emphasizing the importance of outreach. I've emphasized reaching out to public and academic groups outside the discipline, as well as within our own ranks, to build greater visibility and stronger and more inclusive communities within geography. During my time as president, I developed Geography as the Real initiative. I'm particularly proud of this acronym. It took me all night long to come up with it. I'm not a smart guy. Yeah, I hear some people back there agreeing. That's all right. The Real initiative stresses our discipline being responsive, engaged, advocating, and life-improving. I freely admit that I like acronyms. They make me feel smart. It's okay to laugh, by the way. This is, in general, a pretty depressing address, so it's okay to laugh a little bit. But I also believe that acronyms can be pretty helpful, speaking of stories, to focus attention and discussion. The Real acronym is a convenient one that hopefully resonates with you. After all, geographers are known for taking on the grounded social and environmental realities of a changing world. But for me, it's also personal. And so I want to tell you my story. I remember being an early career professor and attending my first university curriculum committee meeting. You can imagine how exciting that was. Where a group of colleagues and we were trying to establish new courses in geography. A committee member from the School of Business who served on that committee staunchly opposed the proposed courses, showing really how little he knew about the discipline. And indeed, he said to us point blank, and for everyone to hear, We all know that geography is not a real discipline. It's okay, you can get really depressed about that. It was an absurd and offensive statement. It's a statement that deserved no real response. But for me, I knew at that moment that I had to clearly explain to that opposing colleague and to the larger onlooking committee what geography was, why it mattered, and for whom it should matter. In other words, I had to tell a good story. And honestly, since that day, and like many of you in attendance, I've never stopped really telling people that geography is most assuredly real. The real initiative is meant to reaffirm what many of us already know in practice. At the same time, I see the real initiative as a call to arms. The real initiative is about increasing careful and ethically responsible public engagement. It's about developing skills in communication and communicating science to multiple audiences. It's about engaging in savvy and aggressive disciplinary advocacy and promotion. It is about carrying out an ethics of care within our departments and our communities. The real initiative is intended to affect change both internally and externally. It's about enhancing the viability of geography within our universities and workplaces. It's also about creating opportunities to work with wider publics on issues such as well-being, environmental sustainability, and social justice and equality. Underlying this ideal of the real initiative is an active rethinking of who and what is a public intellectual. And so I would encourage you to consider what role you might play as an engaged scholar teacher and an engaged scholar professional. My colleague Josh Inwood, who's there in the back, I don't know why you couldn't sit up front. He and I have just published a special forum issue of Professional Geographer on Public Intellectualism. It is tremendous. I suggest everyone read it. I got to say that. We really did push back very much on the traditional notion of the public intellectual being this lone elite authority, this celebrity commentator that we see on CNN. Now, obviously, public intellectuals are that. But instead, our discipline is better served many times by geographers being engaged in multiple roles and settings of outreach and communication. It's about making a difference that fits within one's skills, one's identities, and one's sensitivities. And Hilda Kurtz, one of my colleagues from the University of Georgia, she's contributed to this special forum and has written, I think, a fantastic piece. And according to her, our jobs as geographers are not to monopolize truth, but to contribute to ongoing debate, to mix our ideas and voices in creative ways, to inform and work with diverse public groups. And I think that important point opens up a huge chasm of space for all of us in our own way to be heard, to be seen, to tell a story. There are numerous ways in which geographers can work as public intellectuals, but many of them revolve around the practice of storytelling. Scholars and professional societies, such as the one shown here, increasingly argue that stories are important to the efficacy of science. They are not the frosting on the cupcake. They are the bread and the cake that we have to eat that's going to get science promoted and advanced in our society. These same individuals and groups are working to train scientists to be better communicators. And I'm happy to say that the AAG has been very much engaged in this and has hosted some of these workshops here at annual meetings, including this one that we're at now. For much of my life, I've heard the phrase, and maybe you have too. In fact, sometimes it bothers me to hear this phrase, but I hear it a lot. Talk is cheap. I certainly believe that words are empty if they're not backed up by actions and deeds. Yet there's been sometimes an unhelpful tendency to separate stories from material bodily realities. I like to think about stories, like many aspects of social and cultural life, as a form of work. Yes, some talk can be offered cheaply, but good, impactful storytelling is the product of hard work. At the same time, stories can have great power. They can do the work of influencing audiences, shaping decisions and policies, and making and unmaking geographies. Thus, it's important that our stories in geography are consequential and place redefining, and that we put them to work socially and spatially, that they are part of actively what we do in the practice of geography. But stories alone do not move people. The effectiveness of storytelling comes from materializing our stories and connecting them to wide arrays of policies, practices, political decision-making structures, and coalitions of social actors and groups. In fact, if Doug Richardson were up here, and Doug, you can certainly join me if that make you feel better. It's a tough crowd in here. I know it's lunch. You are sacrificing a great deal, but for God's sake, throw me every once in a while a little laugh. But Doug has taught me, sitting on the council, that good policy making, because AAG now is heavily involved in policy, does not happen just by communicating well. It's about rolling in that communication with building coalitions with various different social political actors. Importantly, materializing stories is about configuring them within the places, communities, environments in which we wish to narrate and affect change. So one of the things I'm going to be doing in this address is highlighting a series of geographers who I've met on my travels, who I've either had emails come to me or I've had the privilege of watching them present. And I want to highlight these people, and of course I can't highlight everyone, but to sort of show you some examples of some good storytelling and ways in which we can push that frontier even further. Story mapping has emerged as a highly popular way in which geographers and others can anchor stories within spaces and landscapes, and the ways in which we can combine those stories with maps and multimedia to make narratives for people to explore and learn from. John Harner, who's pictured here at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, he's worked with his local museum to develop an exhibit called The Story of Us. It's an interactive storytelling project that combines artifacts, photographs, stories, GIS animation, LiDAR, and 3D virtual walkthroughs to explore the historical geography of the Pikes Peak region. And beyond what John's award-winning effort has done to advancing digital geohumanities, it demonstrates how stories can be put to work in the service of communities as they determine and even debate how best to retell their past. John's project is more than just technically assembling maps and stories in effective ways. It is also about connecting those maps and stories to the building of partnerships and the building of understandings within his community. In this respect, the story map is doing considerable social work beyond merely presenting Pikes Peak's history. Joseph Kursky, who many of you probably know, the consummate authority on story maps and education, GIS education with Esri, says that while story mapping continues to expand, especially among geographers, there is still much room for fully realizing its potential to inspire action among people, especially citizen scientists. So even though geographers are making significant strides in putting their stories to work, there's always more room for improvement. Two other geographers illustrate how storytelling can be combined with social practices and institutional structures to become materialized or put to work upon the landscape. Jim Kernan at SUNY Geneseo has formed a partnership with a local state park. He combines environmental storytelling with hands-on work with natural landscapes. And in doing so, he expands the educational efficacy of not just his geography program, but also the park as a site of public learning. Artist and historical geographer Shanna Griffin is working to tell the story of black displacement in New Orleans. Some of you may have remembered her from last year's AAG meeting. Shanna has developed a walking tour of the city that weaves her counter-storytelling into New Orleans landscapes to form an impactful spatial narrative for visitors and locals. So beyond simply advocating for an enhanced culture of storytelling within geography, I'm asking that we explore the reparative capacity of those stories. Reparative storytelling is adapted from recent scholarship on reparative histories and geographies. That scholarship, which I don't have time to go into the kind of detail it deserves, resists contemporary social injustices by connecting them to histories of racism and colonialism. That reparative storytelling is about making amends for the generations of policy, popular, and academic thought that have sanitized and forgotten those connections between the past and the present, and which attempt to recover the dignity and the rights and the resistance of harmed communities. I still want to remain firmly situated in that progressive stance, but also suggest that we can talk about storytelling in the broader sense of that word, of reparative, and that is to repair. I'm asking that we as geographers explicitly consider and make spaces for realizing the reformist potential of our storytelling and how we can communicate to effect meaningful change inside and outside the discipline. And for the remainder of my talk, I'm going to be talking about what I see as 3 opportunities for reparative intervention. And I'll identify some of the work required of doing that kind of reparative storytelling and also the challenges that face us. I would suggest to you that there is a tendency to see storytelling as very individually focused. It's a solitary job, and certainly it can be. But I think a culture of reparative storytelling it's a collective effort, and it does require investments. It requires training. It requires protections, reorganized priorities. And in some cases, it requires us as geographers to rethink what our job is. The first theme I want to talk about is reparative storytelling and how it can perhaps be used by geographers to tell stories that challenge and redress the fallacies and inequalities that come to characterize the post-truth world. How might my ideas, how might your ideas remedy the marginalization and misrepresentation of certain problems, communities, and environments? How can our storytelling destabilize the destructive social and environmental myths frequently circulating in the media, the policy, and in social practices? And I think an important distinction here is I'm not just simply saying a form of storytelling that is a critique of what we hear and see. I'm talking about a form of storytelling that in critiquing, it offers creative solutions for really rethinking and leveraging our work to improve the situation that we see in front of us. So the work of storytelling is about being deliberate, and it's about being deliberate in how and what we communicate. And it's also about ensuring that we identify who our audiences are, and that we ensure that our communication resonates with and is accessible and usable to wider publics. A number of recent works by geographers, such as those shown here, and by the way, I knew as soon as I throw this slide up, I will get tons of emails saying, you know, I really wish you had put my book up. It's okay, it's okay. You can send all complaints to Doug Richardson. But these books, along with many others that I don't have room to show you, really demonstrate the power of geographers to tell broad, resonant stories of how social and environmental landscapes originated, how they shape our current lives, and ideas for navigating those landscapes in the future. Importantly, geographers can make visible and understandable what is not self-evident, what has been lost, or what has been suppressed from public discussion. Reparative geographic scholarship that resonates often offers alternatives to the usual and widely accepted ways of knowing and thinking about people, place, and social and environmental processes. Also important is not just writing in effective ways, but broadening the footprint of our scholarship, expanding who reads, discusses, debates, and uses our scholarship. Reparative storytelling is not about passively waiting for our work to be discovered, used, or cited. It's about the work of getting the ideas of geographers in the hands of wider publics who can benefit from them. Important to these discussions of resonance, access, and usability is that many of us contribute to peer-reviewed journals in an academic culture that does not always value highly accessible writing, or promote scholarship beyond specialized audiences. Many journals place our work behind paywalls and logins that are insurmountable for many of the communities and decision makers we wish to inform. I would suggest that the challenge ahead is not simply to write in clear, consequential terms with broader audiences in mind, but to work for structural changes in the political economy of the publication process. Yeah, and by the way, yeah, well, thank you. I was a neglected child, so I will take all the love you got. So while AAG journals are doing well financially, and in terms of impact factor, and you know what I mean by that, we might consider what we need to do to increase the resonance, access, and usability of published items. Transforming articles in our journals into reparative interventions requires AAG and publisher investment in developing press releases, podcasts, video channels, and policy-related briefs about our work. Communicating to wider public audiences outside of a narrow subfield might come naturally to some, and in fact, I believe very much that in this room there are some naturally gifted storytellers. I grew up with naturally gifted storytellers myself as a kid, but for the most part, it requires training and practice. And many of us, including me, no offense to the University of Georgia where I got my PhD, many of us were never trained in graduate school in how to engage in public-oriented writing and speaking. Efforts are already underway in geography to teach these skills. Take, for example, Bob Wilson at Syracuse University. He offers a course called Writing Geography, and I know there are many other courses just like this being offered. And that course is a storytelling and creative nonfiction course for MA and PhD students. And Bob reports that many students hunger for styles of writing beyond the standard academic article and the monograph. And one of his students, Madeline Hamlin, took part of her research on ex-prisoners in public housing in Chicago to write a recent piece for City Lab. And I don't know how many read City Lab, but that's a tremendous publication that gives our field a great deal of exposure, as well as Maddie. And one of the greatest skills that a publicly engaged scholar can learn in translating and promoting their research to the wider public is what media relations expert, who you see here, Lola Alapo, calls the art of the pitch. And by the way, anyone who attended Doug Richardson's retirement celebration at the last night at the council reception knows that his good friend Tom Barrowall talked profusely about the pitching of baseballs. Now, that's very relevant, Tom. I have no idea why you mentioned that at the reception. But this is not just about pitching baseballs. For Lola, being able to pitch a story of one's research is critical to getting journalists and other groups interested in what you have to say. The pitch is being able to speak quickly and directly and clearly to how one's work advances an issue or debate, along with telling them exactly who you are and how you came to do that work. Many journalists, by the way, want to know that question. They want to know what brought you to this topic. They want to know the person behind the research. The AAG's new partnership with the media outlet, The Conversation, will assist geographers in effectively translating their research to the public, while also widening access to national audiences. If you're unaware of what The Conversation does, plan on attending the session following this one. Although honestly, you're going to be pretty hungry for lunch. Reparative storytelling cannot be reduced to just a technique or partnership. Rather, it's a larger remaking of us as scholar communicators and scholar teachers. And sometimes it requires letting go of the anxieties and the insecurities that keep us from speaking and writing freely. How many suffer from a little bit of anxiety? I have a lot of it right now. All right. And it does keep us from fully fulfilling our full potential. And for 2 years, I worked with colleagues to host the GFDA Early Career Faculty Development Workshop at University of Tennessee. And one of our most popular workshop sessions was not about tenure and promotion, was not about publishing, was not about how to get along with your department, although that maybe should have been. It was an improvisation or improv workshop where one of my colleagues, Steph Benjamin, led early career faculty in improv games. She used improv games to sharpen faculty members' skills in listening, communication, and teamwork, and to help them let go of the self-judgment that often comes with their creativity, that often compromises their creativity and their confidence. For geography programs in the AAG, we should ask the question, how well are we training and preparing scholars technically and emotionally to engage in greater reparative storytelling? There's a need to make storytelling a formal, widespread part of the early career development experience, as well as the experience of retooling senior career colleagues. Reparative storytelling and making active interventions in public debates about controversial issues is about putting oneself out there during very turbulent times, turbulent and scary times. We now have a growing record of geographers writing op-eds, conducting interviews with news outlets, publishing blogs, and organizing teach-ins, to mention just a few examples. And by the way, I thought it was very interesting that while I'm speaking to this group of just distinguished people, and I mentioned media, my Twitter goes off. So let me turn this off. Sorry about that. We also have a group of role models, many of these people pictured here, who have sought to influence public debate. These scholars include Susan Cutter, Carolyn Finney, John Kelly, Shiram Kay, Bill Mosley. Bill's here in the audience. I paid him to be here. Farhana Sultana, and of course there are many, many more. These scholars see impactful storytelling as a key responsibility of their public scholarship. But they are the very first ones to tell you about the personal and professional vulnerability that such activity can bring. So for our discipline, reparative storytelling will require at least 2 investments of work in addition to the individual efforts required of geographers. First, there's the work of updating and reforming academic structures of merit and tenure promotion to reward public writing, speaking, and advocacy leadership. Second, there's the work of developing resources, protections, solidarities to assist and care for academics targeted by backlash, intimidation, and harassment. And while the AAG obviously needs to be involved in such work and is involved in such work, it has to be carried out across many scales of our lives and our careers within and outside our institutions. One of the most exciting communication developments in the discipline has been the rise of what we call creative geographies. This approach recognizes the educational and political value of developing the artistic and creative capacities of geographers and communities as they work together to address social and environmental issues and struggles. In order for reparative storytelling to reach and impact wider public groups and seriously change the thinking and the feelings of the public, we must continue to make room for the full range of creative expressions of geographers. And those creative expressions would be, and they require being acknowledged, those would include publishing zines and pamphlets to inform community organizing, such as what's been done at UNC Chapel Hill. They would recognize the documentaries of Robert Lemon, Jennifer Pate, Jessica Jacobs, Joseph Pallas, and other filmmaker geographers. The weekly poetry releases of Stan Brunn. Stan, are you in here? In the back there. Every week I receive a poem from Stan. Everyone does. It's not something that I just personally involve and enjoy. It also would involve recognizing the spoken word performances and activism of one of my University of Tennessee students, Heather Davis. The major challenge facing geography in the AAG is that our current technology and culture of publication does not fully accommodate this creative work, notwithstanding the huge strides that have been made by the journal GeoHumanities. Geography needs a flagship multimedia publication platform to deliver audio, video, images, text, and data to facilitate new ways of organizing and presenting geographic knowledge and stories. Reparative storytelling for the purposes of influencing and possibly changing minds and policies is something that certainly requires generating highly visible cutting-edge research in the ways that we have always done. So my suggestion is not to abandon that, But it will also require rethinking how we approach the issue of resonance, public access, scholar training and support, and empowering, as I mentioned just a minute ago, the full creative power of the discipline. So for geographers to maximize the reparative interventions in the post-truth politics, it's necessary to strengthen geography's reputation as a field interested in critical issues, advancing debates, and affecting environmental sustainability and social justice. This is about using stories to enhance the visibility and the perceived value and prominence of geography within K through 12 schools, universities, and communities. It's necessary for us to tell stories about ourselves to wider publics on and off campus that push back against popular misconceptions about what geographers do, what we can contribute, and who we are. The storytelling of disciplinary promotion must be intentional. I'll repeat that. It must be intentional. It does not simply happen, does not simply evolve. It has to be intentional, it has to be aggressive, and it must repair the damage done by nagging stereotypes that still surround our beautiful field. Former AAG President Alec Murphy, his new book, Why Geography Matters, is an excellent example of what I'm talking about. Alec makes the case for geography in outright and deliberate terms. Alec, is Alec here by chance? All right, he's not here, but you can tell him I said this. It's a great book. Alec has the grace of an artist and the forthrightness of a sledgehammer. So you can put that on the next edition of the book. You guys are starting to warm up a little bit. This is nice. It's also important to create what I like to call a storytelling encounter. This encounter is an opportunity for public groups to do more than just hear and read about geography. We have found at University of Tennessee, and by the way, this talk is also an infomercial for the University of Tennessee. Okay, all right. So we found at University of Tennessee that the story of geography most resonates with students when they can reach out and engage and experience that story in bodily, affective ways. For the past few years, let me get back, sorry about that. Past few years, Mike Campanovo, who's pictured there with the sunglasses on top of his head, I asked him not to have those sunglasses on. He's used augmented reality sandbox as a way of creating hands-on storytelling encounters. He's engaged students, thousands of students in our university and across the public schools of the state. Mike has made the story of why geography matters, the very same story that Alec is telling, into a tactile and sensory experience that's not soon forgotten. Encountering and being affected by geography, while certainly shaped by attention-grabbing books and demonstrations, can and should be part of the everyday life of our departments and programs. A reparative approach shifts our attention from simply geography awareness to geography advocacy. This is a point that I made in one of my columns. Now, one of the things that I don't know if you realize is when you become president, no one reads your columns. But I encourage you to go back to that column. It's about speaking directly to the value of the practice of geography, not just the learning of geographic facts and literacy, but the value of the practice of geography to other disciplines and the larger society. Key to creating impactful disciplinary advocacy is enhancing the culture of promotional storytelling and battling against the academic and lay misunderstandings of geography. The work of geography advocacy is about departments deploying multiple storytelling mediums and techniques that include things such as brochures, newsletters, banners, campus and community partnerships, student clubs and networks, alumni advisory boards, and redesigned curriculum. Even the very words we use to describe our degree programs and our courses are part of the politics of repairing some of the misunderstanding of our field. Justin Stoller at the Miami University there in Florida has led a multi-university study of undergraduate students' perceptions of the terminology and jargon, I repeat jargon, used in many geography programs. Justin's team found that some of the technical words that we have traditionally prized and used and that we love so much to describe our field do not resonate with students. and others unfamiliar with geography. So as we seek to repair and expand geography's place in the public mind, it's important to realize that stories are not just a matter of marketing. They are not just marketing. Storytelling is a means of growing and strengthening the community of geography. And I'm proud to say that the incoming president, David Kaplan, you'll hear much more about that theme from him. He has a very ambitious and I think insightful program ahead for himself. Stories are selective narrations of the world that just as easily exclude people as include people. Important is putting our storytelling to work in broadening the participation of historically underrepresented groups. Reparative storytelling is concerned with the politics of whose voice is heard and given authority and whose voice is being silenced. Reparative storytelling is about empowering and learning from historically neglected voices within our discipline and society. This is about making amends for the selective way that certain people's knowledges have come to matter more than others in the academy and within the larger public sphere. Thus, it's important for geographers to create spaces for listening and responding to the stories of our students, our colleagues, our co-workers, and our wider communities, especially those marginalized in these politically turbulent times. Underlying this idea of reparative storytelling is the cultural and scientific power of listening. Listening is not a passive process, but actively involved in the construction of meaning. To facilitate the storytelling of marginalized public voices requires what I'm calling accountable listening. Accountable listening is not just making time to hear, but being open to being affected by and to act upon what is said and what is heard, to validate the storyteller's worldview and life experiences, to take responsibility for the power dynamics within which that story is shared. Accountable listening and reparative dialogue from public storytelling can blur the expert-lay divide. It can check privilege at the door. It can lead to a co-production of knowledge rather than monopolizing that knowledge and that truth. Accountable listening recognizes, as Willie Wright, who's pictured here, has written, that marginalized groups often have deep reservoirs of organic intellectualism. And those deep reservoirs of organic intellectualism can help ground, inform, and complicate our academic theories, methods, and activism. Accountable listening is mindful of whose story is told or not, and who is allowed to count as a storyteller. Reparative storytelling seeks to remedy the unequal way in which certain voices and perspectives have come to matter within our discipline and beyond. We continue to struggle, and this is like I'm Captain Obvious in stating this. We continue to struggle with diversity, inclusion, and inequalities in our discipline. Can we have agreement on that? Empowering the storytelling of historically underrepresented scholars should be done not just out of a sense of equity and fairness, but out of a solid recognition that, that this diversity of voices adds innovation, it adds complexity, it adds richness of perspective that otherwise would be missing. For example, a recent interview, radio interview, Rashad Shabazz on Minnesota Public Radio illustrates this type of value added when creative scholars of color address issues and speak to the importance of geography. Recent advances in the Black Geographies movement, led by the folks such as LaToya Eves, Catherine McKittrick, and many, many others, is not simply about analyzing the role of race in making place. Rather, it's a badly needed centering of the voices, lived experiences, and spatial imaginations of Black people, including scholars, within our understanding of the world. To promote this type of reparative storytelling within our discipline requires the work of managing what I've come to call the ecosystem of academic departments and industry workplaces. It's about creating room and support for listening to and elevating a diversity of voices, rather than making sure that your personality and your power dominate. The balance of personalities and power relations can often get out of whack in the academy, and you know who you are out there. People who did not smile, it's you. And that ecosystem can get so out of whack, it can detract and compromise and threaten the ethics of care that Vicki Lawson so famously argued for during her AAG presidency, and the health of departments. Much of our reparative storytelling needs to do work in our departmental offices. It needs to do that work in classrooms. It needs to do that work at AAG meetings. It also needs to be part of the very scholarly process we hold so dear and give visibility to a greater range of voices in the publications that we read and write and reference, and also in the panels we organize at professional conferences. Important to the politics of voice and ego that runs through geography is the power that we have traditionally given to the views of academic experts or industry specialists over community voices. Our job as scholars is not always to assert our ideas, but to bring attention to other voices that can tell their own stories on their own terms. Reparative storytelling is thus the work of creating spaces of empowerment and dialogue. Doing so not only ensures responsible portrayal of life experiences, but dialogue and accountable listening can work to create spaces of solidarity between academic and wider communities. In the current post-truth world of highly charged narratives about discriminated against people and places, it's especially important that we're open to listening to and validating those very communities targeted and harmed by those destructive lies. I think it's very appropriate, by the way, I meant to mention this at the beginning of the talk, that I'm carrying out this address in the epicenter of the destructive storytelling that has been inflicted upon this nation. Geographers are making some important contributions to facilitating spaces of dialogue and reparative storytelling. Manel Matani, an award-winning media specialist and also geography researcher and professor. From 2015 to 2018, Manel hosted the radio show Sense of Place. Love the title of that show. Out of Vancouver, Canada, and that show was decidedly anti-racist and decidedly feminist in its approach. The show provided a conduit for amplifying and engaging the voices of others, including the stories of systematically disadvantaged communities. Joe Wood, who's also pictured there, has worked effectively to bring the stories and voices of the Baltimore community into the classrooms of the University of Baltimore to discuss race and racism. For this year's AAG meeting, and at this very moment, he is playing hooky for my address, although I have given him permission to do so, like he really cares. Joe is leading a field trip as we speak called Freddie Gray's Baltimore, and participants are meeting with and listening to community members who will tell their stories of growing up in West Baltimore, as well as about the unrest of the 1968 and 2015. Joe's efforts in particular speak to the way greater accountable listening can significantly help our AAG meetings become more public in their outreach, more responsive to social and environmental issues affecting host cities and regions. The reparative work of Joe and Manel demonstrate the work of curating and facilitating a sharing of stories of others. This type of work is not about appropriating these voices or speaking for them. As one activist once explained to me so beautifully, it is about storytelling, not story-taking. I've sort of slid this slide in here that doesn't work very well. Inserted this slide to bring up the point that at this very meeting we are engaged in, I think, some very productive reparative storytelling, accountable listening, taking care of and being responsive to our members with the Harassment-Free AAG initiative led by our current president as well as Lorraine Dowler. So I think there's plenty of room for expanding this further. And we could think perhaps about how this same work at the AAG meeting can carry over to creating spaces in other places for addressing exclusion and harassment and listening to survivors in an accountable way and in a sensitive way. So to conclude, I'm going to ask you to consider some questions, all right? So this is, my mother never really wanted me to be a professor. Now, she's proud of me, I think, but she actually thought I would be a preacher. And the problem is I sin a lot. It just doesn't work. But I will leave you every good sermon, and my wife Donna's father's a pastor, and he's a terrific pastor, ends with a sermon, some take-home points or things to do. As you conclude, I ask you to consider this. What reparative work can your storytelling do within your department, your workplace, your subfield, your community to keep things real? What specific work can you do to tell and materialize reparative stories about our society, environment, and discipline? What work can you contribute to accountable listening and empowering the stories of those marginalized in geography and beyond? I would suggest to you, with all seriousness, that one of the other questions you have to ask yourself is, what are the stakes and the cost of not telling your story, our story, and other people's stories? And I'll leave you with this. I want you to do a lot. I want you to leave here, get yourself some lunch, and I want you to develop a story, all right? And that story can be large, that story can be small, that story can be quantitative, it can be qualitative. That story can talk about the world as a global place, it can talk about your small community, but I want that story strong. I want it to have an effect. I want it to do reparative work. We have to have those stories. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I do love the love. All right. Have a very good day, and for those interested, stick around for the conversation session. Thank you.